Hello and happy Easter to you. My name's Rod Peppiett and I'm the Minister of the Word in the Avenue Uniting Church in Blackburn, Victoria, meeting on Wurundjeri country. Today our Easter reading, our Gospel story comes from Mark chapter 16. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone from us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. It's been raised. He's not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Not the most auspicious beginning, is it? Any way we look at it, this is a pretty strange and stark way to end a story of new life and hope. According to the earliest manuscripts and the most reliable manuscripts we have, however, this is how Mark's Gospel ended. And people have been confronted and challenged by that ever since. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke, although largely based on Mark, go much further than he did in adding details of the empty tomb and resurrection experiences and all of those kinds of things. And later scribes of Mark's Gospel, who were also unhappy with the original ending, also added to it, bringing it more into line with the other Gospels. And that's, I think, chapter 16, verses 8 or 9 to 16. But it seems fairly clear that Mark did intend to end it at verse 8. But equally clearly, the biggest story of resurrection among the early followers of Jesus didn't end there. Something happened. Something which transformed the lives of fearful people. Something which brought Jesus' followers back out of hiding and into the world. Something which caused them and those who came after them to remember and tell the stories of Jesus with new power and purpose. Something which has caused millions of people since to believe in him. So what's going on in Mark? We know that his is the gospel that we call the "and immediately" gospel. It crops up all the time. And we know he wasn't much interested in things like nativity stories. But why not more resurrection stories? If his aim is to convince us of who Jesus was, surely that would have strengthened his case. Or perhaps he felt his case was strong enough. As it stands, the clearest statement about Jesus at his death comes from one of the soldiers who had just killed him. Truly, this was the Son of God, from the centurion. Perhaps that was enough for Mark. Someone who didn't care about Jesus one way or the other was the one to recognise him. Or maybe the statement just before that was the central point for Mark, that at the moment of Jesus' death, the temple curtain, which was there to separate people from the presence of God, was torn apart. God's holiness was no longer hidden for Mark. It was out there with the naked dead man, falsely killed as a criminal. Perhaps for Mark, such profound truth didn't need all the details that others would give it. Now, I'm aware there's some speculation there, and I'm never going to know the mind of the gospel writer, and I'm okay with that. And instead of trying to explain it, I want us to think for just a few minutes today about what we might take from this gospel today that helps us to live the truth it proclaims. Firstly, I rather like the fact that this gospel seems unfinished, or perhaps open-ended might be a better way of putting it. I tend to respond to the honesty that it expresses, because I have little doubt that whatever resurrection looked like, being afraid was a pretty reasonable first response. With hindsight, we know the story doesn't end there, or we believe it doesn't anyway. But as Mark wrote, the future was still pretty unclear. To a community that was facing persecution and all the rest of it, perhaps knowing that the first witnesses had been afraid too, brought comfort and courage. And today, I doubt that our fear level is as high, but there remain many challenges in following the way of Jesus. I often find it quite daunting to be faithful to the one in whose way I believe. And looking again to the faithful ones who've gone before me in their struggles and their challenges, that encourages me to keep going. I'm also aware that there are many in the world today for whom the fear of the first witnesses echoes their own. So many people of all faiths face real and physical danger because of the ones in whom they believe. So I like the earthiness, the reality in Mark's Gospel. And I see in its ending the same struggles that had been present throughout Jesus' ministry. Jesus trying to help those who around him see what he was on about, but at the same time confronting them with the mystery of God. Each time they looked like getting it was balanced with another one when they didn't. In Mark's Gospel, I see Jesus and I see me. I see us. And at the end, I see a gospel left in the hands of people like us. Real people with real life going on all around us, and with the choice to speak up or say nothing. Now, Mark doesn't tell us what came out of that, but others do. And that's as it should be within Christian community. The different stories come together with different ideas, different experiences, different priorities, and it grows into truth. Truth shared, truth lived, truth practiced. And by that I mean it becomes what forms the community, and the practices are what the community does together in shaping its life. That, for me, is why we do church. Now, we know from other witnesses, particularly in Acts and the letters of Paul, that the gospel spread not only because of what people heard from the Christians, but because of what they saw in them. They saw communities of faithful people living with the truth of Jesus that they proclaimed, coming together because it was hard to be faithful by yourself. Together they were stronger, and their fear became love. The witness of Scripture is that believing in Jesus is a shared experience, and that resurrection is to be lived out and practiced. Easter invites us to engage together with the truth of life, death, and resurrection. It challenges us to go beyond simply remembering what happened to Jesus and what the Spirit of God did with that way back there. It calls us to look forward, to imagine a hope-filled future, perhaps a legacy for those who will come after us, to imagine and plan for the next season of the Avenue Uniting Church, or the church that you belong to wherever you are. Easter calls us to enter more deeply always into the way of resurrection together. Not only to be Easter people individually, but an Easter people together. The candle behind me was made in our community on Good Friday. It was transformed from a sleeve with broken bits of wax in it into a candle. And today we lit it for the first time. We call it the candle of Christ in community, and we light it whenever we come together. It speaks to us of the life of hope in the midst of all of the reality of the world. Thanks be to God. Happy Easter.